Welcome, all of you, to our study of the Bodhicharya Avatara, the way of the Bodhisattva. And here with the guidance of His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. Just while I remember, we're sort of, I would say we're through well over 80% of the text. Now the text that's going to follow will actually come as a beautiful logical sequence. And this is a text by the great sage who was in many ways the teacher of Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, in that Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche was blessed by him when he was very young, and who was also really someone who shaped, you could say, the Nyingma and the Kagyu traditions of Tibetan Buddhism. This was somebody who really combined, you could say, the yogic and the tradition of reasoning. And there was a very, very great master who we sometimes refer to as the omniscient Mipam, Jamgon Mipam. And he wrote a very beautiful text called The Sword of Wisdom. And it's a text that really, for us in the modern world, is extremely important because it very much lays down, you could say, the foundations, the rational foundations for what we're doing in Buddhism. And that provides a lot of faith. Of course, rationality itself can never get us to enlightenment, but rationality can provide us confidence in the validity of what we're doing. So this is a text that's going to be essentially an extension of where we finish here. The wisdom chapter of the way of the Bodhisattva is going to take us into a discussion really of how to approach this insight that's free from our ordinary dualistic projections and what we see as a consequence. And this way, this text both illuminates the vision of the Mahayana, and also it illuminates the vision of the Vajrayana. So that's what's going to be following here, the Sword of Wisdom. Just to let you know, here we are still within the 8th chapter on meditation, and we still have the chapter on wisdom and then the dedication section to go. Anyway, overall, the way of the Bodhisattva is a pith instruction from a great sage in the Mahayana, which is the spiritual path, the path to awakening, the path of wisdom, but which brings in a very important dimension, which is the entire dimension of greatness, of vastness, and stepping outside of the ordinary comfort zone of our habitual patterns, our expectations, our need for this and that. So it really provides an insight into the greatness of what we mean with enlightenment. And there comes a lot of trust in this, because there's the sense that we already have this enlightened disposition. And for us to kid ourselves and just sort of retreat into a place where we think, well, maybe some of those other great people will do it for us, is really antithetical to everything that we're doing in the Buddhist teaching, which is very much the Buddha and the enlightened quality abides within ourselves. So everything that we're doing in terms of the way of the Bodhisattva is aligning us with a greatness that is actually part of us. We might think we can't do it, but there's 2,500 years of men and women who have done it and who essentially are backing us here and saying, yes, this can be done. So in that way, approaching this as with an understanding that we're addressing really what lies at the heart of suffering universally, we'll continue with the text. Actually, I'm being reminded that His Holiness and in general, the practice that we do in our lineage is very often, the practice of study is very often preceded by opening prayers. So we'll do that. So quoting from the Vinaya, the Prajna Paramita, and taking refuge and developing the enlightened attitude. Abandon evil doing, practice virtue well, subdue your mind. This is the Buddha's teaching. Like a star, an optical illusion or a flame, a magical illusion, a dewdrop or a bubble, like a dream, a flash of lightning, or a cloud. So should one consider all compounded things. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. Yeah. So presently, we are in the chapter of meditation, and we're presently looking at a section that is about exchanging self and others, in the sense that we're becoming aware of the others. The whole nature of our confusion is this addiction, this solidification of me, and my experience of the other, my realm, the experiences that I have, and so forth, my perceptions and so on, all centering around me. And this we can break out of. And one very helpful way of doing that is beginning to actually consider others, basically beginning to be aware of the world and discovering the vastness really of our existence beyond just the ordinary confinement within ourself and the insecurity, fragility of ourself. This, of course, is very familiar material, but we can also see how this doesn't necessarily bring about our own happiness. So Shantideva here says, those desiring speedily to be a refuge for themselves and others should make the interchange of I and other, and thus embrace a sacred mystery. So His Holiness comments, this sure method for protecting others, including oneself, is nevertheless difficult for those with a limited understanding of bodhicitta. This is why Shantideva refers to it as a sacred mystery. So in this sense, this is not obvious. It goes contrary to our default addiction to our need for confirmation, gratification, etc., wanting everything that we wish for ourselves. And as such, it's not easy. It's not basic to the way that we habitually think of ourselves, but it's also that way that we think of ourselves in our world is the very cause of our suffering. So we're not presenting something here that's like some moralistic thing that one must do or whatever. It's not something about challenging us in an impossible way, but it's really just pointing out what really is going to help us. And this stands in opposition to the things that we're habituated to, which bring us down. So in that way, in some way, it's not obvious. But on the other hand, if we look around us, we can actually see how we admire and would delight when there is this interchange of I and other taking place in this world. When others are courageous and selfless and so on, we rejoice. And when others are being selfish and so forth, we don't rejoice. We feel disappointed, and sometimes even we feel angry that others are selfish and so forth, narrow-minded, what have you. So in that way, there is, even though it's difficult, there is a clear understanding of the value of this. But it is something that is, you could say, hidden from our ordinary way of thinking. At the same time, also, it is a sacred mystery in the sense that it's something that is profoundly real and good, even though it lies beyond, you could say, the surface or under the surface. It's something that truly is good. So His Holiness, referring to Shantideva, says, as he points out, the principal obstacle is cherishing oneself. Because of our attachment to our bodies, even little things alarm us. This body then, this source of so much terror, who would not detest it as the worst of foes? wishing to relieve our body's ills, our hungry mouths, the dryness of our throats. We steal the lives of fishes, birds, and deer, and lie in wait along the road. And for the sake of profit and position, some there are who even kill their parents or steal what has been offered to the triple gem, because of which they'll burn in hell of unrelenting pain. So there you go. This is a tough one. Well, this is not saying that we are bad by definition. So this is where we need to actually be a little bit sort of broad-minded and understand what's really here. And it's not that difficult to understand, but we can see that us making a big deal out of our bodies, and we're not talking about the practical thing. We're not saying, oh, you shouldn't feed yourself. We're not saying that you shouldn't clothe yourself. Or in general, you could say be deeply grateful for our physical embodiment. That we're not saying. What we're talking about is the toxicity that is basic to self-clinging. And that's where we have to admire, we have to acknowledge, we have to appreciate how it's true that we do actually have some excessive attachment to the bodies, and how this, in fact, is something that very often brings about so much anguish. The way that we're seeing our body should be in a particular way, and so forth. And so also our clinging to ourselves over others. You know, if somebody is going to harm us and so forth, we can sometimes commit incredible crimes and so forth. Even though we might not, we can see it happening. So we can, in this way, our sort of ordinary cherishing of the body is, when it's exaggerated, this is something that really we would see really that this is the worst, the thing we're most attached to. It's most the thing that's strongest associated with the self. And so it is something that we would want to not relinquish as such, but understand the problems that arise from our attachment to the self. That's also why you see in the practices of men and women in Tibet would go to cemeteries and practice something called chud, which is actually cutting through the ordinary fixation on the body, simply just offering the body up. We're not, again, this is not anything unhealthy or anything in terms of, you'd say, our being, our true being, but it is confronting that which we're most attached to. I'm often reading the story of Ayu Khandro, who was a great practitioner. She was a student of Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo, and we have an English translation, a remarkable life story of her really as somebody who wandered through cemeteries practicing chud. And chud is this practice then of relinquishing the attachment to that which we hold most dear. But it's important. Again, like I said, we need to understand this, not sort of draw a conclusion, hey, should I not be good to my body? And all of that kind of stuff. That's not what we're saying. So I hope you're sensitive to the point that's being made here. So then also an extension of that, then we can see that inevitably, on the basis of us essentially sustaining ourselves, we do like animals of prey do. We very often take the lives of others. And even if we're vegetarians or vegans, we take vegetables. And eating those vegetables inevitably also is tied up with the animals that were living in these vegetables or living in the places in which these vegetables grow and so forth. So all the time, we have this as the very nature of samsara, this inevitable situation of the karmic debt that we have then on the basis of our bodies. And then, of course, taking it to the extreme, and for the sake of profit and position, there are those who even kill their parents. So, of course, that's in extreme cases, but we see that in terms of, parenticide and in general, just people committing terrible crimes, really, just out of wanting profit, wanting status. And also, which of course is not so common in our culture, but the notion of stealing from the monasteries or the temples, those, you could say, edifices of enlightenment, to where people out of faith would have made offerings and so forth, to steal from them is something that is regarded as extremely negative. And that's where we, through doing that, we perpetuate a profoundly alienated experience in which we see us against them. And perpetuating that is really what constitutes what we refer to as hell. So the problem with the hell is that once we're in hell, then it's as if the environment and the others, they're against us. So it perpetuates for an extremely long time this cycle of alienation with regards to ourself and our environment and the others. So that's where we talk about this condition of being unrelenting. So His Holiness comments, to sustain this body of ours, to which we are so attached, we kill other beings. To make it comfortable, we steal. To satisfy its ephemeral desires, we indulge in indiscriminate sexual activity. In short, because of the importance we attribute to our bodies, we accumulate a lot of negative actions. If we let our bodies do whatever they want, it can only be to our loss and detriment. So again, here we're not talking about the wisdom of the body, but we're talking about then the ordinary, you could say just basic, short-sighted, you could say habitual patterns and urges that that here, if we follow with them without any kind of awareness and without consciousness, then it's something that brings about our own future suffering. So Shantideva says, where are the wise and prudent then who cherish God and serve the body, who would not perceive it as their foe, and as their foe regard it with contempt? If I give this, what will be left for me? Thinking of oneself, the way of evil ghosts, if I keep this, what will be left to give? Concern for others is the way of heaven. Now again, this is where there's also a difference in the discourse. You could say the flavor of the common discourse within, you could say, native Buddhist cultures, where it's all right to be critical of oneself. Nowadays, we have sort of a very delicate discourse around each other where we're sort of like, yes, mustn't say anything that in any way could upset you and so on. Whereas not just in not just sort of in Asian cultures, but even in our own culture, just going back a while, then there was a lot more robustness around the self. Of course, also this could potentially lead to abusive situations. But in the Asian context, and particularly then within the context here of Buddhist cultures, and particularly then the cultures of people on the path, then there's so much trust in the presence of enlightened intelligence that the identification of self-centering is actually something that's very refreshing. It's like when we have close friends that point out our faults. We can laugh at ourselves, but that's only because our friends have the sensitivity to that, we have the intelligence to that we are able to laugh at ourselves. Of course, when we are very fragile, then probably we even our friends with the best of intentions make us laugh at ourselves. We don't get it. But we also can identify that when we have that confidence and intelligence that appreciates that which is beyond self, then we're able to actually identify how our destructive patterns are actually ridiculous. And that's where we can sometimes refer to our own practices in terms as ridiculous, my ridiculous need for this or that. And we can laugh at ourselves, and our friends can sort of slap us on the shoulder and says, gosh, you're being an idiot, And that's actually coming from a place of a lot of trust in terms of our potential. So Shantideva here comes with this kind of trust to the reader and says, gosh, this attachment to the body, what is it going to do? How could that ever be helpful? It's like really what brings you down. And this whole thing about, oh gosh, could I give this away? Because then, maybe there's nothing left. I shouldn't be generous because then I have less. There's a very sweet story about someone called Geshe Ben in Tibet. He's mentioned in the Words of My Perfect Teacher, but this story is not actually not in there. But there was a situation in which there was a gathering of practitioners, yogis, and monks and nuns, and so forth. And there was the benefactor who was going around handing out yogurt to everybody. One eats a lot of yogurt in Tibet. Good. And so Geshe Ben, he was sitting in sort of in one of the back rows, and the benefactor was going around to all the sort of practitioners, giving a scoop of curd to each and every one. And Geshe Ben, he was looking up, and he was kind of like looking forward to the curd, but then he realized there might not be, he was sitting way back in the row. He realized he might not actually, there might not be any left when they got to him. He right away spotted that mind that thinks, oh, will there be enough for me? Rather than rejoicing in the fact that others were getting it, there was that sort of, like Shantideva says here, this thinking of oneself, the way of evil goes. He was sitting there worrying that there might not be any curd left when they would come around to him. So when finally the benefactor, then he realized this mind that sort of the mind of the ghost, the creepy mind that sort of like essentially, which is our downfall. And he said, well, this mind, I'm just not going to feed that. And so when the benefactor came, I was going to offer Geshe Ben some curd. He just says, no, thank you. This hungry ghost has already had, and passed on it. So in that sense, just being aware of the sort of the subtlety of this mind is really the hallmark of the practitioner. And being onto that, then it's really about us being much more aware of the others. So that's where it says then, concern for others is the way of heaven. Stands in strong contrast to the sort of the ordinary preoccupation with regards to ourselves. And so His Holiness says, if we harm and impoverish others to further our own interests, we shall be reborn in lower realms, such as the hells. On the other hand, if we forget ourselves in order to benefit others, if we are prepared to give our own lives and save the lives of others, giving them whatever is necessary for their welfare, then we shall gain happiness and all perfection. And again, we might think this is a tall order, but just look around the way that we rejoice when there's selfless action and how we actually are appalled when there's selfish action. So you can see the nature of the economy that we're talking about here, which is the reverse of our ordinary sense of, you could say, survival or self-centering or whatever, is actually the true cause of happiness. So that is the sacred mystery again. His Holiness says the result of wishing to be superior to others, to be famous, will be lower rebirth or rebirth as an idiot, in abject misery, with an ugly body. On the other hand, true humility, treating others as more important than ourselves, will lead to our being reborn in the higher realms, where we will be respected and influential. If we force others to work for us and serve us, inconsiderately abuse them, in future rebirths, we shall end up as their servants, or even their servants' servants. Whereas, if it is we who spend our lives serving others, we shall be reborn as kings and leaders. So again, this comes back to this nobility. But the nobility here is not undertaken with the hope that, okay, I'm going to be, I'm going to be humble and treat others as more important. So then I can become, I can have this future result. That's not the point either. These benefits are just, you could say, natural extensions of that practice, and they are not the object of the practice. They're just a secondary benefit that is not at all the Bodhisattva's aim. So the Bodhisattva is not selfless from the point of view of wishing to have particular benefits, but it's just making the point that for us engaging in Bodhisattva practice, that naturally all these things that we fail when we are self-centered, they actually come spontaneously when we are selfless. So His Holiness says, these then are the benefits of being gained from regarding others as more important than oneself, and the disadvantages of giving oneself precedence. And now we come to some quotes that you would have come across several times. I remember actually in if you've ever seen Sansa Jamaican's images, the cup. This actually comes at the end of the sort of, I think it's before the end, the sort of, what's it called, the rolling titles or whatever. And at the end, there comes these beautiful quotes from Shantideva, and these are, you could say, lines that we very often see. These are the kind of lines that we'd want to memorize. Shantideva says, all the joy the world contains has come through wishing happiness for others. All the misery the world contains has come through wanting pleasure for oneself. Is there need for lengthy explanation? Childish beings look out for themselves. Buddhas labor for the good of others. See the difference that divides them. If I do not interchange my happiness for others' pain, enlightenment will never be attained, and even in samsara, joy will fly from me. So, so His Holiness comments, our greatest enemy is to consider ourselves more important than others, which leads us and others to certain ruin. From this attachment to I arises all harm, fear, and suffering in this world. What, asks Shantideva, am I to do with this great demon? So here we're setting it up very, you could say, very black and white. There's something that's really harming us, and there's something that could be really beneficial. Of course, the path forward here is not what we very often have in political, you could say, in the political arena and in the political mindset, which is, oh yeah, well, does that mean I should then be down on myself? It's not a political thing. This is not polemics. It's not polarizing. It's about us just being sensitive to the situation here. The path of dealing with this, of course, is gentleness. So it's never as if we're going to now start sort of punishing our body or all that kind of stuff. That's not what we're talking about here. So that's where we need to let go of the sort of the political mindset that goes into the other extremes. So that's obviously not what we're talking about. But we need to understand that there is something that is harming us, and that this actually doesn't define who we are. So there's every reason to want to step out of this. So that's where we are talking about this ignorant condition as a great demon. I say this because sometimes it's extraordinary how these teachings get picked up and sort of basically from that political mindset begin to think, but that's terrible, referring to my own mind as a demon, like we have this in our dedication, overcome the enemy wrongdoing. Wrongdoing really just refers to confusion. And the enemy, well, it doesn't mean that we're up against someone like we have in an ordinary worldly situation, but it's just that we need to identify that there's an issue here that needs to be addressed. And there is a tendency that is bringing about our own suffering. So that's why we're using this language here. We need to be clear that there's something that needs to be dealt with. So Shantideva says, if this I is not relinquished wholly, sorrow likewise cannot be avoided. If they do not keep away from fire, people can't escape from being burned. To free myself from harm and others from their sufferings, let me give myself to others, loving them as I now love myself. For I am now beneath the rule of others. Of this you must be certain, O my mind, and now no longer shall you have a thought that does not wish the benefit of others. My sight and other senses, now the property of others, to use them for myself would be improper, and it is likewise disallowed to use my faculties against their owners. hang in there, please, because this, we could sort of react to some of these things, but really try to understand what's being said here. And it comes with, like I said before, a lot of trust in terms of what we are potentially capable of. So, of course, as long as there still is the sense of I, that goes, even we abide, like we talk about how the gods abide in the realms of samadhi, and they will abide there for a very long time. But as long as this I, this essential delusion, this ultimate cognitive obscuration has not been relinquished, then the seed of suffering is still there, no matter how subtle it is. So as much as there might be incredible bliss and holiness and what have you, as long as the fundamental ignorance haven't been addressed, then we haven't gotten rid of the cause of suffering. So right now, what we wish to do really is caring for all sentient beings, caring for all sentient beings, including ourselves. This does not stand, again, we shouldn't get the political mindset where we think, gosh, well, before I love others, I must first love myself. It's not about us and them. It's about all of us together, a universal sympathy and warmth that extends beyond any sense of self and other. And then we should say to ourselves, well, we're common property. Again, this goes way beyond the sort of the how do you say, individualist project of modernity, right? For sure. But here we are dedicated to the welfare of others, and so we're determined to simply sustain that attitude. We're now public property, so that's where we have no right to actually, you could say, perpetuate the ignorant patterns that we've been habituated to. So that's to use them for myself would be improper, and is likewise disallowed. Now, to use my faculty against their owners. So now we're public property again. This probably goes against a lot of the ways that we commonly like to think in terms of us protecting ourselves and so forth. But that is really where the Bodhisattva is coming from. And there's not a sense of anything that is about me in the even most subtle way. Remember Trungpa Rinpoche, he talks about sometimes on the spiritual path, we'd sort of like to have just a little place where there's still a little room for me, We'll be ever so dedicated to the spiritual path, but we'd like to just have a little corner for me. Isn't there just a little corner for me that I can hide out in? And of course, that's the whole point here. There's actually no joy in that. There's no joy in that mentality. And the confidence and the freedom and the joy that we're talking about here is actually the complete relinquishing of that entire mentality. So His Holiness comments, as we have taken the vow to devote ourselves solely to helping other beings, and from the depth of our hearts have given everything to them, we should consider that our bodies are no longer ours, but belong now to them. So we must never use any part of our body to do anything that does not help others. Whatever we can see in ourselves that is good, let us snatch it away from ourselves and use it to serve others. And so, His Holiness comments, we come now to a practice that is special to the Bodhicharya Avatara. And then Shantideva then says it. Take others, lower, higher, equal as yourself. Identify yourself as other. Then, without any thought, immerse yourself in envy, pride, and rivalry. So here, we're now beginning to think of the others that might look on us, and then begin to view us. Here, he says, His Holiness says, we begin by evaluating our own good and bad qualities, and on this basis, comparing ourselves with others, distinguishing between those who are equal to us, those who are superior, and those who are inferior. To do this, we make a distinction between our new good side which has seen what is wrong with considering ourselves more important than others, and the benefit of regarding others as more important than ourselves. And our old, bad side, the egotistic I. The new I now identifies itself with other beings and takes their side. The old I has three aspects: superior, equal, and inferior. So this is someone else looking at us and essentially sort of assessing us, you know. And the new I, which is now identified with others, has these three aspects as well. So we're essentially completely shifting around, and then we're observing ourselves. There's Jakob, you know, he thinks he's a big deal, you know, or he's so superior, you know, he's no more superior than I am, you know. So there's that kind of looking, completely shifting the view that ordinary comes from us into then we become the object, right? So His Holiness then comments, we shall use these two distinct eyes to develop successively a sense of jealousy, competition, and pride. First, we look at the good qualities in which we surpass others, identifying ourselves, our new I, with these inferior beings. We make ourselves jealous of the superior qualities of the old egotistic I. It's not fair, we cry, that he is respected while we're not. So here I am, you know, I'm feeling miserable, and I'm looking at this guy, Jakob, who has, you know, he's got, you know, several meals a day, he's got a place to live, he's probably really so full of himself and so forth. So, you know, and I have friends, you know, Jakob has friends, you know, well, he shouldn't have friends, he's a despicable person. So then the other self is looking at us and saying, he's the center of attention, I'm nothing, and unlike him, I'm poor without possessions. Everyone looks up to him, despising me. All goes well for him. For me, there's only bitterness. All I have is sweat and drudgery, while he is there, sitting at ease in front of his computer and his webinar devices, you know, with an audience that's listening to him. Damn him. That wasn't Shantideva, by the way. Okay, take two. 142, it says, all I have is sweat and drudgery, while he's there, sitting at his ease. He's great, respected in the world, while I'm the underdog, a well-known nobody. So, if we find this comparison too humbling, we should not get discouraged at our lack of good qualities. Let us remember that all beings possess the potential for enlightenment, and that we can attain enlightenment if we make the effort. There is no reason, therefore, to be discouraged. So that's where we need to just be able to essentially begin to yank ourselves out of the way that we sort of make others the object and turn ourselves into the object. And so then it says, what? Nobody without distinction? Not true. I do have some good qualities. Compared with some, he's lower down. Compared with some, I do excel. So that's where then the same person then sort of someone, this other being, right, is saying, me, there's something okay about me. Yeah, I am superior to some. And then His Holiness says, it's not our fault that we are inferior, but the fault of our negative emotions. These notions of superiority and inferiority are entirely relative. We tell the old I, you are only superior because I am inferior. So if you want to stay superior, you will have to put up with me while I strive for enlightenment. What use are your good qualities if they don't benefit me? In this way, when we see qualities in ourselves that make us better than others, we should exchange roles and destroy our feeling of superiority. Yeah. So there we are, sort of feeling, oh yeah, I'm pretty good, you know. And then we can see how others actually might look at us and understand how the whole toxicity around these feelings of superiority, inferiority, they play out. So of course, we're not encouraging this, but we're humbly identifying that we're prone to these kinds of perceptions. So there's somebody we don't like, well, we should try and see then how they view us. And we can see how the problem around our duality, self and other, superiority, inferiority, good, bad, likable, not likable, and so on, actually plays out. Next, His Holiness says, we take those who are our equals. Again, siding with them, we develop a sense of competition with our old I, thinking only of getting the better of him and making him miserable. So this is our peers. By every mean, I'll advertise my gifts to the world, ensuring that his qualities remain unknown, ignored by everyone. My faults I will conceal, dissimulate. For I, not he, will be the object of devotion. I, not he, will gain possession and renown. I will be the center of attention. I will take such satisfaction in his evil deeds and degradation. I will render him despicable, the butt of laughing stock of everyone. So again, here we are. This is about us identifying that this takes place within ourselves. But there we are, then somebody else looking at us, and they'll be thinking, oh, well, I'll make sure that everyone knows, how noble I am, and I'll make sure that nobody will know about the nobility of, that Jakob guy there. And so I'm going to hide whatever, whatever faults I might have, and as such, I will be admired, and then I will be, I will have renown. I will be, respected. So that's where then we sort of identify, yeah, this Jakob guy there, I will be so happy when, he loses his, his his the respect, and his smug character will be brought down and all of that, and everybody's going to laugh at him. Hey. So in this way, what we're essentially doing here is really bringing out to a painful point the mentality of our competitiveness, in relation to others, seeing them as superior, seeing us as inferior, etc., etc., or even here, those with whom we're in competition. And I think there's few of us who wouldn't identify. We probably don't talk about it at our dinner parties. It's probably not what we usually sort of entertain people with, how we actually, have these sort of the dark side of ourselves. But in the Buddhist teaching, we're completely comfortable with the dark side because it's workable. And we're not here in any way beginning to identify ourselves as being, as we're talking about here, ultimately. But we're talking about that we have that tendency towards this sort of embarrassing side or dark side, whatever we choose to see it. But we also take it out and we can look at it. We can laugh at it. We can make light of it. But we need to actually take it out and have that humble acknowledgement. Otherwise, we're going to be endlessly stuck in this cycle of defending ourselves, justifying ourselves, and so forth. The more we can let go of that, the freer we are. So then His Holiness says, finally, we think of those aspects in which we are inferior to others. And then looking at our own eye through others' eyes, we develop a sense of pride. Okay, let's do that next time. Yeah, this is rather entertaining. So we'll pick up next time. Let's see if there's any comments to this. No comments, hardly. Okay, well, I hope this is a sign that this is perfectly clear. Because it's certainly provocative, and it's so, you could say, counter so much of the common discourse, which is very much about us sort of being incredibly respectful to each other and so on, while we kind of ignore all the problems that are sort of percolating under the surface. If it's a demon, doesn't that mean it's impermanent? Just like any other state of mind, it will pass. A mind that is impermanent phenomenon, like Buddha nature. Yes, that's exactly it. The demon doesn't exist. The demon is an impermanent, a dependently arising, empty phenomenon. And that's the beauty of this. And that's the very reason why we can talk about this demon, because we have no allegiance to it. Or rather, we're not in any way we're not submissive to it because the demon has no reality. And aren't we fools if we are being controlled by what ultimately is a non-existent phenomena? Isn't it? Wouldn't we be fools to be held by the demon of the self-centering? So that's where we need to see this is such a negative thing, and it's so ridiculous that we actually kowtow to it. So yes, the demon is certainly an impermanent phenomenon. Okay, if there's no other questions, then I'll just go. We have about, yeah, almost 15 minutes left. I'll just go over the next section then. Okay. So people say, okay, this is where we're sort of looking at ourselves. Gosh, that pathetic Jakob. So today says, people say this pitiful non-entity is trying to compete with me. But how can he be on par with me in learning, beauty, wealth, or pedigree? Just to hear them talk about my excellence, my reputation on the lips of all, the thrill of it sends shivers down my spine, a pleasure that I bask and revel in. Even if he does have something, I'm the one he's working for. He can keep enough just to survive, but with my strength, I'll steal the rest away. I will wear his happiness away. I will always hurt and injure him. He is the one who in samsara did me mischief by the 100. So again, this is familiar, you know, very often this is sort of a theme in a lot of the sort of, you could say, more simple narratives that we have in literature and the arts and so on, right? So there it says, putting ourselves in the place of others is very helpful for seeing the faults of the egotistic I, and we become deeply disgusted with it. When we practice like this, using jealousy as a tool, let us imagine that our old I is very good looking, well dressed, wealthy, powerful, and has everything he needs. Then we imagine ourselves as an impartial spectator in the midst of a crowd of paupers, dressed in rags, the lowest of the low. Now observe the old I, who since time without beginning has thought only of himself and has never given a thought for others. To further his own interests, he has enslaved others and has not hesitated to kill, steal, lie, slander, and selflessly indulge in sex. He has been nothing but a burden on others' lives. When we look at this egotistic I in this way, true disgust will well up in our hearts as we identify ourselves with these other beings in all their misery. We feel closer to them, and the wish to help them will grow. We should make our practice on competitiveness and pride vivid and real. Let us remind ourselves of all the negative actions the I has made us do, all the harm it has done us, making us suffer and causing endless suffering of others too. This is our real enemy. Would it not be wonderful to make it suffer more than we do and even make it disappear altogether? Should we not be genuinely proud if we could break it and render it powerless? Again, forget the political mindset here, but it is about us not kowtowing to what in fact has brought us down. And that's where this sort of vivid exposition of either the jealous mind or the arrogant mind or the competitive mind, these sort of identifying these vividly, we can see how sentient beings suffer. And so in that way, it's, if we make ourselves the object, then we're no longer sort of bound in terms of you know, our own insecurity, but we can just see how it plays out. We're essentially acting out. It's sort of, you could say it's very sort of cathartic. You could sort of do a little improv here. You just get into the mindset of what we're saying, what we're suggesting here, and just essentially take it from there. And that's where we can identify how this sort of this hierarchical self and other thing really really in its nth degree. Actually, what we refer to as Rudra, you know, the cosmic ego, how it actually plays out in its extreme. In the Vajrayana, you very often see wrathful deities, and the wrathful deities are essentially what we call the body of Rudra, which was surrendered to enlightenment. So, for example, you see someone like Vajrakilaya or the 8 Herukas we have in the Nyingma tradition, or the wrathful deities in other traditions, and so on. These essentially embody, you can say, the ego taken to its max, to the complete, you could say, powerful epitome of egohood, and in that powerful guise, then completely surrendering to enlightenment. So you could say the most full level of manifestation imaginable. And that's what we're doing here. We're taking ego to its height, where we then can see actually the comedy for what it is. So that's why I'm saying, you know, try and do this as an impro. If you're into this, that kind of you can do that. But it is really about then being really clear, vivid, have a really vivid perception about how actually this is painful and this is not what we truly are. So it's a really brilliant, like I was saying, kasajic exercise that Shantideva is coming up, and I think it appeals to a lot of us who might have a background in in acting, or if not acting, then a background in acting out. So, so this is again Shantideva's brilliance. And then he says, and therefore now most certainly apply yourself completely to the good of others. The Buddha did not lie in what he said. You'll see the benefits that come from it. So His Holiness says, having examined all that is wrong with considering ourselves more important than others, and having seen all the harm that such an attitude brings, we should revolt against its domination and never let the thought of our own importance influence us. So there should come a point where we're kind of horrified at the potential of ego and saying, no, I do not want to be like that. I don't want. I've seen myself in my worst aspect. I don't want to be ruled by that mentality. So, well, let's see if there's any comments at this point. Okay, that's good news then. So comforting, especially for people really stuck in negative habitual patterns that can hurt themselves or others. There's always hope. Yes, very much. This is what Shantideva is all about. We can be gentle with those demons in ourselves and others, perhaps. Is that what the story about Milarepa is about in the cave? How stepped into the demon's mouth and it disappeared? Well, Milarepa didn't. It's true. Milarepa's realization of Shantideva's point here, namely the letting go of clinging to the self, that's what made the demons go away. It wasn't that Milarepa stepped on the demons. He didn't step into their mouth. He didn't harm them in any way. He realized they were projections of his own mind. There was at one point he started to sort of chant some wrathful mantras, and then that made maybe one. There was like 7 of them, and one went away with some wrathful mantras. But they essentially all disappeared on the basis of his realizing this lack of self. Yes, studio audience.
Western modern mindset, a lot of people more likely to be sort of self-criticizing and denigrating and just sort of contrary to what's been said.
Yeah.
And like the antidote to this, in a way, that's a self-obsession. But then the antidote, just wondering.
Yeah, so we have very often in Western psychology the sort of the notion, the problem around self-worth, self-denigration, and so forth. And that, of course, is intrinsic to the entire path, that we're no longer perpetuating patterns in which we actually feel bad about ourselves. So we are proactive in sort of being the cause of our own sort of sense of self low self-esteem, low self-worth. And that's why the path from the very start actually very skillfully begins with you could say, an aspect of behavior, where it's very much about being who we would want to be and engaging in actions that bring about a sense of well-being and dignity and, you know, the whole aspect of discipline. And that's where, in that case, when there are individuals with sort of low self-esteem and so forth, which we all have, then sometimes wisdom, the wisdom of no self, can be quite difficult to sort of right away understand, understand lack of self. And that's where very, very often there is the whole aspect of behavior, the whole aspect that have to do with our actions. And that's where really at that point, then it's very much about you know, engaging in actions, virtuous actions, avoiding negative actions, and so forth. So this is not just in Western psychology; it's really universal. It's, you know, this is something that has, you could say, afflicted everyone at all times. So it's very much about us beginning to make friends with ourselves through first our actions, and then through the practice of meditation, in which we are not prone to these habitual narratives that arise from within. So we become more and more free of these narratives. And then, and this is where what we're approaching here, then there's an increased sense of just trusting in ourselves and the wisdom from within, in which there's not really the sort of the preoccupation around self. And that's then the project of wisdom. But like I say, that's sometimes difficult to start with. So really the beginning of it has a lot to do with the way that we carry ourselves in terms of our actions with body, speech, and mind. In shamatha, we use our out-breath to connect with pure awareness and open space. But isn't this reinforcing the dualistic view? Would it not be more useful to view cognizance as outside of self and therefore see any sense of self as simply another labeled part of the ongoing interplay of causes and conditions? Well, we do that. We're actually doing, when we mingle with the space outside, it actually breaks down the ordinary way in which we actually solidify the other simply by ignoring. The moment that we're connecting with space through the out-breath, there's an inclusion of the other within this simplicity that is our experience. So otherwise we would be retreating into ourselves. And that's where we could maybe have some view of cognizance as being selfless. But the moment that we engage this, because this experience of selflessness in meditation, the moment that we experience that, what we're doing here is actually engaging the space around us within that. And so the perceptions that we're having of the world out there, the sounds and so on, they're actually accommodated and brought in as being part of that, equally a part of our perceptions, along with the thoughts that arise. So that's also why, and this also, particularly in Vajrayana, you see very often, you can see deities or sages portrayed with the eyes wide open, looking straight into space. And that is very much within that space of, reflects this approach of the non-duality between subject and object. So, yeah, I hope that makes sense. This is actually a very skillful aspect of the Mahayana approach to meditation, that there is this engagement of the space. And of course, this becomes further emphasized and you could say cultivated in the Vajrayana sense of the sacred perceptions as part of mandala. Okay, we'll conclude. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night, realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning. May we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together.